And so good to have all of you here with us this morning as we dive into the uplifting topic of blessings and curses. Woo! A complex parsha for sure, and really kind of part of the series of instructions that Moses is giving to the Israelites. Right there, think about the setting of where this parsha begins. They're sitting in the land of Moab, just on the other side of the Jordan River, really getting ready to enter into the promised land. Finally. And this is a different generation than the generation who had stood in basically the same spot 40 years earlier, going out to scout the land, and it turned out it ended in disaster for that particular generation. But so here Moses is really offering instructions for how the Israelites should shape their society, should live their lives, both kind of the ethical, the moral, the social framework that would shape Israelite society. So with that kind of setup, let's start with our blessing for Torah study. And here we go. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Adonai, our God. Blessed are you, Holy One, for giving us the mitzvah of learning and living words of Torah. So, Parshat Re'eh begins, right? See or behold, this day I set before you blessing and curse. So, let me share my screen here and we will. Why does it keep doing that? Sorry.
What chapter, Rabbi?
Chapter 11, verse 26. Interesting that it kind of starts, the new portion starts at the sort of the end of chapter 11. I guess it's just sort of a natural thematic break here. Okay. Great. Here we are. So, Re'eh anochi noten lifnechem ayom bracha v'klala. So, uklala. So, a bunch of kind of important words here that we're going to spend a minute on. Right, Re'eh, see, behold. Anochi noten, right, I am giving lifnechem, giving you, or you all, or all y'all, if you're from the South. Bracha uklala, blessing and curse. We're going to talk more about those words. But so can I get just somebody to read this opening couple of verses for us as we dive in here? All right, Elaine, go for it.
Shabbat Shalom. See, this day I set before you lifnechem, blessing and curse. Blessing, if you obey the commandments of the eternal your God that I enjoin upon you this day. And curse, if you do not obey the commandments of the eternal your God, but turn away from the path that I enjoin upon you this day, and follow other gods whom you have not experienced.
Nice. So I want to spend a moment on just this language, because I think the use of the third person plural, right? Lifnechem. I guess it's the second person plural. Pardon me. Right, all of you. Right, it could say lifanecha, right? Just sort of you, singular. But so obviously, there's much to be commented on by this use of the second person plural. So here are a couple of comments. So first, the Kotzker Rabbi says, while the Torah was indeed given to everyone, it was placed before you all. Each person only beholds in it that which they are capable of seeing. And one of the reasons I bring these different kind of pieces, I think there's just some interesting ways of looking at how these different commentators think about Torah in general. particularly based on these very specific kind of simple word choices in the Torah itself. And then Rabbi Eli Munk, who's much later, looking at that phrase, Anochi noten lifnechem, I present before you. He says, here the Torah expresses its basic principle of free will. The blessing that results from good deeds is completely in human hands, as is the curse that results from evil deeds. The Midrash Tanhuma states that prior to the giving of the Torah to Israel, individuals were subject to the fate of the community. If the community as a whole was worthy, even its wicked members were spared. However, if the community as a whole was wicked, even its worthy members suffered. However, now each individual is treated on their own merits and receives a blessing if he obeys and a curse if he does not obey. So an interesting concept here that part of this simple choice that's presented and the way in which it's presented is set up that really is about an expression of free will, which I think is an interesting concept to think that here it is. We might read this and say, oh, these curses are really terrible, which when we get to Deuteronomy chapter 28, that actually starts to list out all the different curses that the Israelites will be struck with, and they're not good. They fit the brand of curses, but this notion of choice is really inherent and really central in, I think, how we understand Jewish tradition, or how we understand sort of the nature of what Judaism asks of us. Eli Munk, kind of in an introduction to this particular statement, says to clearly understand the challenge of free will, one must be able to see into their own conscience. And so the Torah begins its considerations regarding this problem with the verb re'eh, to see, which goes much deeper than Shema here, whereas here implies an impression of external factors affecting one's life. See suggests an internal perception penetrating deep into one's soul. So also interesting, this difference, right? We think about when the Israelites are kind of given the Torah, they say, anybody remember what they say? That famous two-word statement? Naaseh v'nishma. Yeah, Dahlia remembers. Naaseh v'nishma, right? We will do and we will hear, or we will obey. And so here Munk is kind of contrasting these instructions with the idea of hearing, right? That hearing is kind of passive, and it's sort of like, look, here are two choices. You all get to decide what the choice is between these two forces. Elaine, go ahead.
So I think there's something very interesting that I never thought about before, in the sense that this points up that there is free will, but I think more than conscience, there's a consciousness involved, because it seems as if it's kind of saying, in a way, every act is a conscious choice, and it can be a bad thing or a good thing if you follow these rules. But I think a lot of what we do is not conscious. So this kind of really implies a high level of, if there's free will, it's not like following a list of rules as if it's rote and being unconscious about it. So am I like stretching that a little bit too far?
No, I think
Because
you're right on.
that's hard. That's a
You're
lot
right.
of the stuff we do is unconscious.
Yeah, and I would say two things to that. So one is you're right on track for actually where the text is about to go, kind of thinking about how do we kind of maintain and affect the choices that the community is making. I would say it's sort of a weighted consciousness. I don't know if that's a concept that exists or if I just made it up, but the list of curses is pretty harsh and pretty lengthy, as if to say, like you can choose whatever you want, but it's not good if you don't choose the right way, right? The way that we as a society are trying to set up what is right and what is wrong. I mean, look, I think any kind of ethical moral system is trying to say this is right, this is wrong. To a certain extent, the Torah is also talking about like here's who's in and who's outside of this community, right? Here's when we talk about we, this is what we mean, and that's them or us and them. But also, I think a clear sense of right and wrong, with a sense of yes, you can choose, but there are. I mean, as many of the B'nai Mitzvah that get these Torah portions talk about is kind of this awakening to the concept of consequences for our actions. Joanne, were you raising your hand before? Here, you want to grab the mic? It's right there. You might as well. I think it's on. Maybe. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so I just have a question
Sure.
about the Lechnechem, meaning everybody is I present before you the basic principle of free will, but then does that way of talking about to the you, the group,
Mhm.
change below that into you, the individual? Because you're talking about individual free will here, or we were talking about individual free will lower down in
Right.
the
That's a
paragraph.
good question.
And so yeah.
This paragraph, it's an excellent question, and it shows that you've read other texts as well, right? Because a lot of times there's kind of a switch between, right? Like Moses might start off addressing, I'm thinking of Nitzavim, right? You all atem Nitzavim, right? All of you are standing before this day, and then there are specific instructions. I think it's Nitzavim that go to specific, like you in the singular. But here it's actually all in the plural. So it's a good question. It's all the kind of the chem, right? Tishmeu, all of you, Elohechem, even Elohechem, y'all's God at Chem Hayom. So it's a good question, but it doesn't actually switch to the singular, at least in these two verses. Maybe later it does. Let's see. Oh yeah, and it does a little bit later. V'haya ki yaviyacha, when your God brings you this in the singular, it does switch, and so it's kind of that balance, and you're like right in line with all the commentators who kind of note that switch, that like some of this is addressed to all of us as a community, and then some of these choices are really about each of us as individuals. Hal, go ahead, and then Larry.
Thank you, Shabbat Shalom. But I mean, I haven't gone through and looked at all the curses, but a lot of them seem to be collective. It's very hard to get really bad rain or bad weather on your field and not the next guy's field.
Targeted cursing.
And so that doesn't quite fit with the notion of the community benefiting or suffering based upon what the community is doing, even though there may be people who are going in the opposite direction.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have more. Larry, go ahead.
Shabbat Shalom, Larry Shapiro. A couple of years ago, I did the Devar Torah on this section, and the thing that struck me was why is this? I mean, the blessings and the curses have gone in multiple books before this. I mean, people know this. I mean, they've heard it all their lives. So why do you have to say it again? Right before you go in. And what I came to realize is that it has to do with I mean, you got two reasons. Either the Israelites are slow learners.
Or stiff-necked people.
Stiff-necked people. Or repetition is so important in the way we structure the religion. We have the same holidays on the same days in the same, every year. It's a repetition kind of thing, and it leads to understanding. Each year you celebrate the new year, and perhaps you learn a little bit more about
Right.
that. And the same way with this, the more times you hear it, the more times it's going to be better understood or a deeper understanding. So I think that the repetition is probably one of the key things here.
Yeah, and I think both repetition and I think it kind of comes through in sort of drips and drabs also. Like they keep elaborating on what they mean by blessings and curses. And in a moment, we're going to look at interestingly, we're going to look at the introduction of a ritual that is then expanded on in chapter 27 and 28. But so we're not going to look at that piece today, but it's kind of to your point, right? It's this introduction of back to what Elaine was asking about, kind of consciousness. What we're going to see is there's this ritual that's used where these communities go up on top of these two mountains, and essentially are like looking down at what the people are doing and shouting out like blessing or curse, depending on what it's almost, I can picture. In the old Looney Tunes cartoons, there'd be like the little angel and the devil that would pop up on the person's shoulder. It's like an externalized version of that like you have the community sort of paying attention to, these leaders of the community paying attention to what the community is doing and calling them out when they're behaving, I guess, like correctly or poorly.
I'm not sure if it was in the commentaries or actually in the Torah, is that it wasn't the people going up on the mountain, it was the Levites going up on the mountain, so that they divided the Levites.
Right, yeah, we'll look at it in a second. Jeff, and then Ellen, and then Steve.
Rabbi, I wanted to ask you about the gray areas. There's never always black and white. Most of the time it's gray. And what's the choice there? I mean, if you don't obey the rule exactly, maybe you can't find matzah or something, I don't know. And, are you still going to get punished? This God keeps punishing people when they don't do what he, she, or it wants it to. And and I know in life, there's an awful lot of gray.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think the optimist in me wants to say, huh?
Interpretation thing.
Well, the optimist in me wants me to say, as long as you're trying, then like that effort is recognized and rewarded. I mean, I think the things for which you're cursed are pretty black and white, right? It's let's see here. Let me find a good cursed, a good curse here.
I'll bet the Talmud had another interpretation.
Look, I mean, the in Deuteronomy, the line that sets up the curses in chapter 28, perhaps is worth, right? If you do not obey the Lord your God to observe faithfully all God's commandments and laws, which I enjoin you upon this day, all these curses shall come upon you and take effect. But I think, like, observe faithfully, right? It's sort of like you are trying, right? As opposed, I mean, some of the most major things for which one is cursed for, right? Think about like the 10 Commandments, like, you don't just kind of murder somebody. Like, I mean, to be fair though, there's a distinction, right, between like manslaughter and murder. But I think there's kind of, you don't just sort of that's not so gray, right? Like something that extreme. I don't know, that would be, but I think part of it is the effort that a person's making. And again, trying to shape the sort of the social, moral, ethical fabric. And they're not exactly black and white, but the gray area I would say, is less gray in many of these instances. It's fairly clear that there's a kind of a clear right way of doing things and a clear wrong way of doing things. And yeah, if you don't quite do it exactly to the letter of the law, like at least you're trying. I don't know. Okay, Ellen, and then Steve, and then Jane had her hand up, and then Ellen. Okay.
Hi,
Everybody for
Shabbat
that?
Shalom, Ellen Ratner. This is all about choices. And the Dalai Lama asks, how many lifetimes does it take to make good choices? I've wondered about that. I could use another lifetime as I look back, to make maybe better choices.
It's like when I worked in summer camp for the first time, the camp director used to always tell us there are no bad children, just bad choices. Sure.
But it's interesting that, of course, the Dalai Lama believes you have more lifetimes that you can then make better choices. He wonders how many does it take?
Right.
How many lifetimes?
I mean, and it's an interesting distinction between like Buddhism and Judaism. Like Judaism is like, look, you've got a finite amount of time, figure it out. I think we're going over to Steve. Which I think, look, I think there's a lot of, I mean, to say there's a lot of wisdom in what the Dalai Lama says sort of seems a little bit redundant, but there's a lot of wisdom in that. I mean, I think, think about when you're younger and you kind of encounter that first thing that you do, and maybe you don't think about what the negative repercussions of that action might be, and then suddenly you meet the negative repercussions, and the next time you're in a similar situation, I mean, that's like the idea of Maimonides, right, around teshuvah, is that complete teshuvah is when you're in a similar situation and you make a different choice, because in theory, you've learned from the mistakes of the past. And I love that concept. Okay, Steve.
Yeah, thanks. Steve Ruvalo, Shabbat Shalom. So I'm thinking about this concept of free will. So we have I'm going back with the Scouts way back when, and forgive me if I don't say this correctly, but Caleb and Joshua think everything is great. The other 10 Scouts are afraid. So free will would say, well, the 10 Scouts who did not agree, they thought it was a bad situation, God should have punished those 10 guys.
Mm.
But yet, he not only punishes everyone 20 years of age or older, including where Caleb and Joshua came from. Their people are also penalized. So where is this concept of free will? So there's mistakes. Everybody suffers. Even the group who represents the people do the right thing, they suffer. You have a concept of free will here. One person with free will does the wrong thing, the people will all suffer. So I don't quite get it about free will. How is really free will?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, on some level, the example that you bring is an interesting one. I think part of the issue with the Scouts is that not only is right, there are conflicting views among the Scouts, and that, I mean, you've got 12 Jews going to look at something. Of course, they're going to have differing opinions on what it looks like and what. But the reason the community is punished is because the community itself are the ones that really like rise up and say, right, who are presented with two different options, right? Those 10 Scouts who were like, no, we can't do it, like that's their opinion. And they weren't, and that's their report. And then there's a different opinion of Caleb and Joshua that say, okay, right, it could, right, so here are two choices that the community kind of has to choose from, and the community just sort of rallies around the negative report and are like, and kind of throw their hands up. It's impossible, we can't do it. So that's I think the punishment, right? So I understand your question about, well, like really it's the 10 that kind of riled them up, but they're presented with two different options and they choose to lean into the negative option rather than the positive option. Okay, I want to go, I think Jane had her hand up. I don't know, Jane, if you still wanted to ask a question, and Elaine, and then Ellen in the back.
Well,
Then Sandy.
from we were talking, when Larry was talking about the repetition, it brought to mind in episodic narrative, you know, how they say, you'll remember last time when we such and such happened, you know, before they proceed with what's going to happen in this episode.
Yes.
They always repeat some. So, it, you know, in addition to everything else the Torah is, it is an episodic story. And let's see, and the other thing was the whole where everybody gets punished. I mean, it's like when we make individual decisions, we're supposed to think whether it's going to harm other people or not. So if your individual decisions only affect you, that's one thing. But I think this is supposed to encourage us to also think about the whole community when we're making decisions.
Yeah, well said. I mean, I think that kind of balance, both the balance and the tension between the individual and the communal experience, for sure. Let's go Elaine, and then Ellen, and then Sandy.
Yeah, two things I think. Well, on the spies, it was 10 versus 2. So I mean,
Sure.
who has more weight there? But also my question is, where do the sacrifices come in? Because it's like, okay, we know you're going to mess up. We have this thing called sacrifices. Like, yeah, so I'm just wondering, thinking about the ability to perform sacrifices because you have messed up, right? Not like you're going to have this curse come upon you and that's the end of it, but that you're going to have the opportunity. So I'm not sure, like, of the chronology. Maybe at this point that those sacrifices are not set up, or are they? Or
Yeah, we've seen. I mean, we're post Leviticus here, where all the sacrifices are kind of laid out. It's a good question. I mean, I think in theory,
I mean,
yeah,
there's an out there in a way. There's kind of an
I was
out.
going to say, in theory, there are certain transgressions that are beyond being repaired by sacrifice, but I don't know that that's like necessarily an accurate statement. But it's an interesting question, certainly. All right, Ellen, and then Sandy.
Ellen Taffine, you know, I'm very confused by the Torah because I find a lot of inconsistencies from one parsha to another.
Yep.
Last week, we learned about God's love for us almost unconditionally, even though we had worshiped the golden calf, which could be a lot worse than these other curses that are given out there. And he let go of that one. He said that, you know, I will continue to love you as my chosen people or designated people. But now all of a sudden this week, he's into curses.
Well, I mean, you know, God likes blessings too. It's both. Yeah, I know, but I hear your point. It's as my Bible teacher in my second year of rabbinical school said, consistency is for pudding, not the Bible. Which was her flippant answer of saying, yeah, there are all sorts of inconsistencies. I mean, again, part of it is thinking about all the, you know, to a certain extent, thinking about it as a piece of literature that is sort of a function of something that was like constructed by different communities over a period of time with lots of different like lots of different groups' influences on what their priorities were. And so like things are, you know, to Larry's point, things are repeated over and over again, but sometimes they're repeated with a slightly different editor in place or a slightly different like authorship in place. And so there's a slightly different agenda going on, right? I mean, look at the difference between how the Ten Commandments appear in Exodus versus in Deuteronomy. They're basically the same. They're certainly the same 10, but some of the nuance and the details and really the kind of the underlying agenda shifts a little bit. It doesn't shift the meaning of them, but they're not exactly, it's not a carbon copy of, you know, what appeared in Exodus was sort of picked up and then plopped down. Like there are different goals in mind.
The sacred text that was given to Moses at Sinai, word for word. Otherwise,
right. Well,
or
it is, and God is just inconsistent, right? That if God is a reflection of, if we as humans are a reflection of the divine image, We're not exactly perfect, and so perhaps one could argue that, I mean, God is beyond all understanding and knowledge, et cetera, but like maybe God has God's own imperfections and inconsistencies, and maybe inconsistencies are just our feeble brains not being able to grasp the bigger. So yes, I mean, I think it's right. I mean, what I said about the kind of historical piece, like that at a certain time and place was very controversial, that like it wasn't given in its entirety by God to Moses on Sinai.
So it's not sacred.
It is though. I mean, I think it is still, it's just a different way of understanding how we define sacred, right? I don't think it necessarily loses its sanctity as being a thing that has been the guiding text of a people for thousands of years, even if it was constructed by people who I think were trying to understand, who they are, what their relationship to the world around them is, what their relationship to forces beyond their control might be. I mean, I think there's a sanctity to that. To going back to Jeff's point, I think it allows for more gray in being able to say, the Orthodox interpretation of the Torah is it was given, right, whole cloth. So when it says do something, you do it. Period. There's not like a debate of, we have in Reform Judaism of, well, is this meaningful for me? Does this speak to me? Does this bring holiness to my life? Like, no, there's no choice here. Like when it says do, I mean, and to a certain extent, that's kind of the argument of the Torah. Yes, there's free will. You can choose, but there's clearly a wrong choice in the view of the Torah. Okay, Sandy, I think.
Yeah, Sandy Spector. So, with what Ellen just said, if you think of it as it's been thought, the parent-child relationship, here's your punishments. First, you know how much the parent loves the child and tells the child, no matter what, I will love you. But hey, you do this, there's going to be punishment. To me, there's no inconsistency about that. This is just, you need to know the rights, the wrongs, and there's going to, be punishment if you do those wrongs. And I think also these are comments and other people's comments. When Steve said about there were two good guides and all the bad guides, to me, that's like what happened with, not to bring politics in it, but voting. You know, some of us feel like we got the shaft because what the majority voted for. So I think in that way about what Steve said, and then the gray part. So I can't believe I'm remembering these. Um, the gray part. I mean, God's not going to say, "Well, if you do this, maybe I'll this," or you could this or you could that. It's got to be kind of black and white, and then maybe we as people interpret it. But God's not going to be wishy-washy. Well, maybe you could do these 8 commandments and then you'll be okay. I think this is if God's not going to be finite, so to speak, about it, we're the ones that screw up about, and kind of mix it up. Anyway, that's all I had to say is
So it's an interesting point. I mean, I think the rabbis actually look at some of the language. So if you look at verse 27, it says, right, so see, I set this day before you blessing and curse. Bless it, right? In the translation, it says, blessing if you obey the commandments of the eternal your God. And curse, and then in 28, and curse if you, right? They read in English identically, but in Hebrew, there's a little bit more nuance. It says, et habracha asher tishma'u el mitzvot Adonai Elohechem. So blessing, like essentially like asher tishma'u, like when you obey the commandments, not so much if. I mean, we're getting into semantics here, but the haklala, which is curse, Im lo tishmeu, if you don't obey, is what so here's one example of this kind of picking up on like asher meaning being interpreted as when, and im, which is really just a grammatical structure, but like as if. So the Panim Yafot, who's an early 19th century Kabbalistic commentary on the Torah, says in regard to the blessing, the Torah states when, implying something definite, right? Like when you do good things, like God knows you're going to do good things. Whereas in regard to the curse, it says if, implying something indefinite. This teaches us that the blessing will certainly be fulfilled. However, the curse is stated as being indefinite, for it is God's desire that the people not sin. If they do not sin, there will be no need for a curse. And Rashi, writing much earlier, interprets that phrase as blessing in order that you may obey. Right? In other words, like the reward is so sweet. And maybe this kind of answers Ellen's question a little bit, right? The reward is so sweet for these good things. Like, of course, you're going to be pulled to want to do your best, right? We want you to bring your best. We really, thinking about the tensions in Jewish education over time, right? Is it we want to teach our children Judaism because we love it and it's beautiful and we are proud of our Jewish tradition, or we teach our children Judaism so that like the Nazis don't win, right? Those motivations were both very present. I will say, like my like religious school upbringing, I think, was sort of shaped by the latter in some ways. This sort of like post-Holocaust, like Jewish continuity, like we have to pass this on to our children so it doesn't die out, like this sort of like doomsday, like that's not exactly like a motivating factor, particularly for a kid, but like we get to celebrate these wonderful holidays and we've got this beautiful tradition and we've got these wonderful values and these morals and like, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, don't, right? Like the Cantor talks about, we have this beautiful inheritance that we pass from one generation to the next. Don't you want it? Don't you want to take hold of this? And of course, like it's beautiful. Yes, I want this. As opposed to like, here's this sort of like tarnished, tattered blanket that, your great great grandfather has had that like is full of Swiss cheese. Like you want this schmata? Like, is our tradition a beautiful treasure chest or is it a schmata? Like I would argue that the treasure chest is far more compelling. That's certainly the way that I tend to approach things. Okay, Joshua and then Rena. And then we're going to look at a couple more verses. I don't know where the microphone went. There you go.
So I want to address Jeff's concern about grayness.
Great.
And also Ellen's about inconsistencies. Inconsistencies are not only exist between chapters and books, but within a single chapter.
Yep.
Not only there, but explicitly acknowledged. Chapter 15, verse 4, there shall be no needy among you, since the Lord your God, I'm not going to do the gender neutral thing, since the Lord your God will bless you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you as a hereditary portion. Later, in that same chapter, it says, however, there is a needy person among you, one of your kinsmen in any of your settlements in the land that the Lord your God is giving you, do not harden your heart and shut your hand against your needy kinsman. Rather, you must open your hand and lend him sufficient, for whatever he needs.
Yeah, I mean, there are all sorts of instances like that.
And the commentary that goes along with this is saying, yes, even though God says there will be no needy among you, if there is, you better give him some money.
Right. It's like a contingency plan, right? The idea, right? I think the Torah certainly is a great example of those kind of organizing concepts, right? The world as it could be and the world as it is, that we aspire for a world as it ought to be or could be, but we live and we operate in the world as it is. And I think the Torah is very embodying of that, right? The ideal is that there will be no needy in your midst, because we're going to build all these systems that when there are needy, they're lifted out of poverty, shall we say? But inevitably, there are going to be people that come into your community or that are in your community that fall on hard times, and so there can't be no provisions for like if there are people, right? So yeah, I mean, but it's a great. I mean, similarly, like we've talked in here about the number of B'nai Mitzvah that kind of like will encounter a text that talks about like slavery, and they're like, they're like, it's okay for an Israelite to have a slave, which also feels sort of it's a different question of consistency, but it feels sort of morally complicated for sure. That like here we were as slaves, holding slaves of our own. So do with that what you will. Let's go to Rena, and then Daniel, and then Harf. Oh, here, you're muted.
See to get
Gotcha. Good. Go ahead, Rena.
yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I was thinking that the Torah is like crime and punishment. That it has a little bit of both in the whole thing. And we struggle because everybody that speaks has ideals, and we hear that week after week, and we feel in the Torah those ideals are not often reflected, that there are inconsistencies and there are bad things that happen, and the people do bad things and God does bad things, yet we long for the perfect. And the Torah seems to have the world as it is, and we're just striving to make there's sort of like a vision board of what should be, and we have to strive for that. But the fact that we don't have it, I think, is very painful for all of us. We wish that it could be perfect and people behaved very positively all the time and generous, kindness, etc. But that is reflected in the Torah, that this is not the way humanity is.
Right. Well said. I mean, I think there's also, as you were talking about this, I think there's also a recognition of in our text of different personalities, right? Some people will find the carrot very compelling, and some people, kind of only respond to the threat of the stick, right? And I think there are those two tensions that, are you going to do good because like the blessings that proceed from following God's laws are so appealing, or are you going to do good because the curses that stem from not following God's law are really freaking terrifying? And so like, and I think for different people, those two forces are compelling. All right, Daniel and then Harv. Then we're going to look at a couple more verses, maybe.
Daniel Sales. So thinking about the inconsistencies and whatnot got me thinking about temporality to an extent too. And part of this is you've got, there will be no needy among you. If there's needy, do the thing. And that's because God is saying, like, God commands you to do the mitzvot. Well, if there's no needy, then how can you give to the needy, which is one. So, and also by giving to them, you remove the condition of neediness. So like on the whole, in the overall look, you see that the design that is in this from God's perspective is there will be no needy, because when they become needy, their needs are met.
Right.
And so you have to take that sort of longer look at it. So it's not a contradiction so much as a like looking at too small a slice before you make your determination.
No, well said. Well said. All right, let's see, Harv.
For us sort of modern people,
Sort of.
I
would argue we're all fairly modern.
I think we have to remember that the Torah was not written at the time of Moses, or whoever Moses might have been. It was written much later, and its interpretation is very complex. But for one thing, the attempt there by the writer is if you do all these, in quotes, good things, then the world is going to be pretty good.
Right.
You're not going to have any anguish and troubles or ajita. But if you don't do them all, then something's going to fall through the cracks, and it's going to reflect badly on you individually or maybe the whole world. And what's then the other part of interpreting anything, I was going to say Torah, but really interpreting any writing is whatever someone writes or whatever someone says, it's going to be subject to interpretations that are not intended.
Absolutely.
And we see that now in our politics. But one of the reasons lawyers repeat the same thing in different words time and time again is because no one single statement by itself is definitive.
Yeah.
It's always subject to some interpretation, and sometimes the interpretations go off the deep end and cause a lot of trouble.
Right. And to your point, I mean, I think to think about the way that Jews read Torah in particular, right? We read the primary text, but like we really, I would say, like understand it and internalize it through the lens of all the generations of interpretation that have followed, which can shift and morph the meaning. I mean, I think about, I don't know, I was an English major, right? Like you read a poem and I'm not thinking of, or even a piece of music, right? A song that evokes a particular feeling or emotion. And, and then you hear the songwriter talking about like what they were thinking about when they were writing the song. And it has nothing to do with like how you or we as a society might understand what that song meant or so yeah, I mean, I think it's a very like human process to kind of make meaning out of something that is sort of fixed, and to figure out what the meaning is. Talia, you're raising, yeah. Okay. Do you have a microphone? Here.
It's called
It's called Talmud. Well, it's Talmud, it's commentary, it's midrash, it's the whole Jewish canon is all. I mean, by and large, like all of subsequent Jewish literature is. I mean, even like you could even make an argument that modern Hebrew poetry is a response to Torah, right? All of it. Dalia, go ahead.
Thank you. Originally, I wanted to comment on the word tishme'u,
Mm.
hearing, and I don't have to say it anymore because you saw that the translation is to obey, but still in tishme'u, in the word itself, in Hebrew, it is to obey. So it's not just translation, it's really very much embedded in that, and discipline come from that same root. Anyway, what I wanted to add to the discussion is a little bit or a layer of the historical background of all those things. So Eretz Canaan, the land of Israel, was settled by different settlers. We think they were tribes. And the history of the place is the history of different invaders. Every time another invasion and they settled, another invasion and they settled. And here is another group of people led by a guy, Moses, if he's fictional or historical, we don't know. But let's say he's one, which is also interesting that he is also leading the idea of one God. So oneness is a recurring theme. And he is trying to move the history wheels forward by this bunch of people going to this place as one. and creating a place as one. And don't forget, there are 12 tribes.
Right.
Big coalition to handle. So, talking about obedience.
Right.
So they
Of Jewish people, right? Like that's a
yes, and they have to go. He want to send them to this place as one and to live as close to one as possible. On the background of there was no oneness. There was this fluidity of invader after invader after invader, and to keep staying there as one. And looking from today, looking backward, he succeeded. For 1,000 years, there was a Jewish oneness of some sort, if we don't consider the break of Israel and Yehuda. But Yehuda was a small splinter that historically survived, but nevertheless, Israel was a big empire. So he is trying to put in motion some system. So the first thing that he said, don't forget that I am the God.
Mhm.
I am that one that you should adhere to. And there are other things to build the oneness, to build the identity. You are not going to eat every single thing. You are eat this and not eat that, and take care of the poor and all those. Anyway, the biggest punishment is that you will stop being one. This big one empire or state or country or sovereignty or whatever you want to call it will cease to exist. That is the biggest punishment. It's not an individual punishment. It's not like you will lose a leg or lose an eye or something like that. You will lose the oneness that you have. And I don't think that I want to spend more time to say what's going on in Israel right now. Thank you.
No. Well said. I mean, I think it's a really interesting way of thinking about the motivation for why these rules felt so necessary. Was really to try to create a sense of unity and adherence. Right? You know, we spend a lot of time, to your point, like talking about the kind of sort of ethical society that they're trying to create, but part of it is also they're trying to create one society with a unique identity from the neighbors that they're going to be surrounded by. And kind of recognizing, I mean, a lot of these texts, going back to Larry's point about repetition, a lot of these texts, I think, recognize the temptation or the presence and also to a certain extent, the danger of external ideas that are potentially gonna have impact and influence on the Israelite society, that like, if you give way to following these other ways, then like this whole project kind of starts to fall apart. So we've got to kind of create borders around, ideological borders around our community that will protect us as we're this fledgling little community. And again, like to the point of history, right? Whether it's written from in the moment of preparing to go into the land, which probably is not the case, and more likely is written by people that have been living in this place for many generations, kind of writing their own history of it, thinking about how did we get to this point where we've got this unique singular identity, and what were the ways that we maintain that? It's an interesting point. I want to look briefly at this ritual, right? So when the eternal your God brings you into the land that you are about to enter and possess, you shall pronounce the blessing at Mount Gerizim and the curse at Mount Ebal. Both are on the other side of the Jordan, beyond the west road, that is in the land of the Canaanites, who dwell in the Arabah, near Gilgal by the terebinths of Moreh. For you are about to cross the Jordan to enter and possess the land that the eternal your God is assigning you. When you've occupied it and are settled in it, take care to observe all the laws and rules that I have set before you this day. So it's interesting, this kind of ritual, and then so it's kind of just introduced here, and then 17 chapters later is a little bit more of an expansion on what this ritual actually looks like and how it plays out. But interesting that you have, Larry, to your point, that the Levites are going to go up and kind of pronounce these blessings up. This is kind of in the northern area of Israel. That's kind of this very like externalized physical reminder. I mean, to your point, Dahlia, of trying to create a society that is following like one set of rules, that you've got essentially like watchdogs, right? Looking out for when you're behaving and when you're not behaving, to make sure that like, and this is separate from the systems of judges and magistrates and tribal leaders, right? All these kind of processes that are set up earlier in the Torah, right, for kind of settling disputes and things. This is sort of like an interesting ritual around kind of watching behavior. Cliff, last comment. Go ahead.
The rules seem to apply to any community, any people. You know, it's ethical, moral, whatever, however you characterize it. But where does the specialness of the Jews come into this? Where does chosenness come in? We don't seem to be chosen for a higher standard than anybody else, if you read the way the rules picked out, and certainly not a lower one. So it's
But the whole
contradiction
structure
between.
of it actually is a reflection of the chosenness, right? That this is the broader context for all these rules is the Jewish people are entering into a contract, right? A covenant that is in theory like based on love, and a deep connection, right, between God and the Jewish people, God and the Israelites, right? That God will give you this land, and God will give you, rain in its season and blessings, et cetera, et cetera. And here's what you have to do as a people, right? So that really is like all of these rules really are meant to be a reflection of that sort of unique relationship between this people. And it's not just like you're better, it's that you're in relationship, right? That this relationship comes with a certain set of obligations as well. It's not just like, the favorite child that like is just given free rein to do whatever they want because they're the favorite. Like they've got to like, the Israelites have to carry their weight here. Like chosenness is a complex weight to carry or burden to bear, in some ways. It's not just you've been singled out. It's that you've got this unique relationship, which is not necessarily better than any other group of humanity's relationship with God. It's a different kind of relationship in which you and God are bound to each other in this kind of unique way. So with that, let's offer our Kaddish de Rabbanan. Please rise. Let the glory of God be extolled. Let God's great name be hallowed in the world whose creation God willed. May God's sovereignty soon prevail in our own day, our own lives, and the life of all Israel. And let us say Amen. Let God's great name be blessed forever and ever. Let the name of the Holy One of blessing be glorified, exalted, and honored. The God is beyond all the praises, songs, and adorations that we can utter. And let us say Amen. God of heaven and earth, grant abundant peace to our people and their leaders, to our teachers and their disciples, and to all who engage in the study of Torah here and everywhere. Let there be for them and for us all grace, love, and compassion, a joyful life, sustenance, and the hope of your sovereignty. And let us say Amen. For us, for all Israel, and for all humanity, may the blessing of peace and the promise of life come true. And let us say Amen. May the one who causes peace to reign in the high heavens, let peace descend on us, on all Israel, and all the world. And let us say Amen. Amen, amen. Shabbat shalom. Have a good afternoon, everybody. Shabbat shalom.